case of Jorge Cortez. Jorge Humberto Martinez Cortez was born on January 5, 1978, in Mexico City. He kept his childhood and teenage years private, only sharing that he often clashed with his mother, who cared deeply for him, and his father, who rarely intervened in their arguments. Jorge's strained family relationships likely contributed to his emotional isolation and the development of his aggressive and unstable personality. To escape his difficult home life, Jorge left at a young age and embarked on a journey across Mexico, taking on temporary jobs to support himself. He worked as a waiter in various bars in Mexico City, including those in the Rosa and Cona districts, and also relied on tips from tourists in the popular Villa Do and Cuac districts, known for their extensive infrastructure and diverse entertainment options. Jorge's life of crime began in this place. In February 2010, he was arrested for theft and given a 4-year prison sentence. However, because it was his first offense, the judge decided to release him on bail. At the time, no one suspected that this decision would set free a man who would later become one of Mexico's most notorious criminals. After his release, Jorge met a girl named Adriana and fell in love. Initially, he treated her with kindness and attention, but as their relationship deepened, his behavior became increasingly violent. Adriana soon found herself a victim of his physical abuse. Exhausted by his cruelty, she decided to end the relationship, but Jorge refused to accept her decision. One night, Jorge violently attacked Adriana, dragging her down the stairs by her hair and breaking her nose. He beat her so severely that she lost consciousness. When she came to, she saw Jorge holding a lighter and threatening to kill them both if she didn't stay with him. Despite his threats, Adriana continued to resist, which further enraged Jorge. He attempted to strangle her by grabbing her neck with both hands. However, Adriana managed to break free, grabbed a hammer, and began fighting back. She was able to force Jorge out of the apartment and ultimately out of her life for good. This violent confrontation occurred in 2011, and although Adriana reported the incident to the police, Jorge was released on bail and avoided punishment. In hindsight, Adriana's escape from Jorge that night saved her from a potentially deadly situation. Jorge would go on to take the lives of multiple women in the future. After meeting Jorge, 18-year-old Yang Kyung-marie became his new victim. Yang was a Korean girl who was very close to her mother, Monica, and her sisters, particularly Anna. Anna was a lively and athletic young woman who balanced her studies in psychology with a part-time job at a restaurant. Yang met Jorge at one of the bars where he worked, and they were immediately drawn to each other. After a brief courtship, they started dating, but their relationship was marked by violence. Despite their frequent arguments, they stayed together. When Yang turned 19, she decided to declare her independence from her family and move to the city with Jorge. However, this change only made their problems worse. Jorge's behavior became increasingly controlling and abusive. He constantly monitored Yang's activities, calling her every hour at work and restricting her interactions with friends. As a result, Yang felt trapped and realized she was a victim of domestic violence. However, she hid the truth from others, including her family, to avoid causing them concern. Only a few close people, including her sister Anna and some friends, knew about the situation. Despite her family's warnings and advice to leave Jorge, Yang struggled to break free. She attempted to leave him multiple times but always returned, held back by her own fears and vulnerabilities. During this time, Yang underwent a significant transformation, changing from a happy and lively person to someone who was depressed and willing to do anything to please Jorge. The relationship continued to deteriorate, becoming increasingly toxic and damaging to Yang's well-being. Yang's relationship with Jorge was marked by violent outbursts. On one occasion, Jorge refused to let Yang into their apartment when she came home late. On another, he locked her inside, set her clothes on fire, and chased her around the room in a fit of rage. In August 2014, their arguments escalated, and Yang decided to leave Jorge and move in with her parents. A friend encouraged her to report Jorge to the police and end the abuse. Although Yang initially agreed, she eventually returned to Jorge and they continued living together. Tragically, Yang's life was cut short. On September 21st, her body was discovered in their apartment, bearing signs of severe bruising. Jorge claimed to have found Yang hanging in the bedroom, stating that he had left her sleeping at noon the previous day, September 20th, after she had worked a shift at the bar. Jorge claimed that he returned home on the morning of September 21st to find Yang deceased. He immediately contacted the police and notified Yang's family of the tragic event. The news of Yang's death was devastating to her family, prompting Monica and Anna to rush to the scene. Upon arrival, they found police officers and forensic experts already at the apartment, carefully removing Yang's body from the bed. Jorge stated that when he saw his deceased wife, he became frantic and attempted to assist her. A police officer explained to the family that an investigation was ongoing and they needed to stay outside the house to protect potential evidence. As they watched, Yang's body, covered with a sheet, was carried out of the house. The police also informed them that the initial evidence suggested Yang's death was a suicide, a conclusion supported by the position of the body in Jorge's account, which the police believed to be truthful. However, Yang's family was skeptical and struggled to accept this explanation, finding it hard to believe that she would take her own life. When the family arrived to identify the body and prepare the necessary documents, they were surprised to find that the examination protocol was almost complete. The death certificate stated that Yang had died from strangulation by hanging. However, when the relatives were allowed to view the body, they noticed bruises on Yang's legs that seemed suspicious. Jorge attempted to explain the bruises by saying that the body had slipped from his hands and fallen to the floor when he tried to move it from the bed. Monica was not convinced by Jorge's explanation and suspected that something was not quite right. Investigations revealed more about Yang's tumultuous relationship with Jorge, fueling suspicion that her death might not be the suicide police claimed. During police testimony, friends described constant fighting between they, revealing Jorge's history of jealousy and aggression. His behavior extended to frequent phone calls to Yang's workplace, indicating a pattern of controlling behavior. Yang's sister Anna noted that a few months before the tragedy, her behavior dramatically shifted. Anna added that she started distancing herself from the family once the relationship with Jorge started. This prompted concern within the family. Despite growing concerns about Jorge's unstable behavior and doubts about the official explanation, the police were quick to dismiss theories and rushed to close the case. Experts at the Katak morgue recommended cremating Yang's body, which meant that further forensic investigation would not be possible. Yang's mother was deeply suspicious of Jorge's involvement in her daughter's death, but she eventually agreed to the cremation due to pressure from her family, thereby giving up the chance to gather evidence to support her suspicions. Jorge did not attend the funeral, but he got a tattoo of a broken heart, supposedly to show his grief. However, he also cut off all contact with Yang's family. Yang's death had a devastating impact on her family, especially her mother, Monica. The overwhelming pain of losing her daughter, combined with feelings of loneliness and despair, led Monica to develop an addiction to alcohol and smoking. Monica was devastated when her daughter Young passed away suddenly. Despite her overwhelming grief, Monica refused to accept the initial explanation of Yang's death, finding it contradictory to her daughter's outgoing and life-loving nature. Unsettled by details like the bruises on Yang's body and the lack of evidence supporting the claimed manner of death, Monica's instincts told her there was more to the story. To get answers, Monica launched her own investigation into the case. Monica acquired security footage from her daughter's home, revealing her son-in-law Jorge was the last person to see Yang alive. With the help of a private attorney and forensic pathologist, Monica reviewed Yang's final days. An unexpected development led to a shocking explanation, revealing a deeply seated scandal and a misclassified homicide. Monica's determination uncovered hidden details, ultimately revealing the truth behind Yang's death. The detective completely rejected the initial account of Yang's death, presenting conclusive evidence that proved she was murdered. Further investigation revealed several discrepancies with the original autopsy. There were no signs of hanging on Yang's body, but her neck showed signs of strangulation, and a scarf had been used to make it appear as though she had hanged herself. Bruises on her hands and fingernails suggested she had tried to fight back. The medical examiner confirmed that any competent expert would have reached the same conclusion. This raises serious questions. Why did the police ignore these facts? And why did the family receive a false report about their daughter's death? Monica's relentless pursuit of truth led her to conduct a 7-month investigation, uncovering a series of disturbing failures and incompetence by law enforcement agencies. Her research revealed that Yang had previously reported violence by Jorge to the police, but her cries for help were ignored. Monica also discovered that Jorge had ties to his father and the staff handling the case, which, combined with the severity of Yang's injuries and the apparent negligence of the authorities, compelled her to take decisive action. Monica appealed to the prosecutor's office, seeking a review of the case and justice for Jorge, the main suspect. However, she was met with neglect and cynicism instead of support. A prosecutor even questioned her competence, suggesting she should focus on being a housewife and seek psychological help rather than pursuing justice. Undeterred, Monica continued her investigation, driven by her love for her child and her desire for truth. Her perseverance ultimately paid off. Jorge committed another murder in 2016, a devastating end to Yang's story. This event began a new chapter in Campira's life. She met Jorge online, where he hid his dark nature behind a charming facade. Unaware of his past, she was drawn to his friendly, sociable personality, and they soon developed a romantic relationship. Campira's close friends discovered her new relationship when she posted a photo of herself and her boyfriend on social media, beaming with happiness. For several weeks, their romance seemed perfect. As 2016 drew to a close, Campira's mother, Margarita, met Jorge for the first time on December 28th. Campira, Jorge, and her children then traveled to Acapulco to spend the New Year's holidays with her parents. However, Jorge later convinced Campira to extend their stay, and she asked her mother to watch the children for a few more days. Margarita agreed, unaware of the tragedy that was about to unfold. 3 days later, Campira was found dead. The last time Margarita had spoken to her daughter was on December 30th. When Margarita tried to call Campira on New Year's Eve, she was met with silence. Campira always answered her phone or returned calls promptly, so Margarita's anxiety grew with each passing minute. As the hours ticked by, Campira's unusual silence and lack of online activity only heightened Margarita's concerns. Eventually, Margarita decided to contact Jorge to find out what had happened to her daughter. Jorge attempted to alleviate Margarita's concerns by downplaying the argument and Campira's departure to celebrate the new year with friends. However, Margarita remained unconvinced and asked a family friend to check on Campira. When the friend arrived at Campira's house, Jorge told him that Campira was asleep and unable to meet with him. Margarita's suspicions grew, and she sensed that Jorge was hiding something. On December 31st, between 5 o'clock and 8 p.m., Jorge committed a heinous crime. He brutally murdered Campira by strangling her after beating her severely with an unknown object, leaving multiple injuries on her face and body. In an attempt to make it appear as though Campira had taken her own life, Jorge cut a lock of her hair, placed her body on the bed, covered it with a blanket, and left the gas stove on. He even placed a portrait of Campira's late ex-husband in her hand to create the illusion that memories of him had driven her to suicide. Around 8:30 p.m., Jorge packed his belongings and left the house. On the night of January 1st, 2017, Margarita tried to contact her daughter Campira to wish her a happy new year, but was unable to reach her. She then called her son Gabriel, who was in the same city as Campira, and asked him to check on her. When Gabriel arrived at his sister's house, he was immediately hit with a strong smell of gas. After turning off the gas burners, he began searching for Campira and was shocked to find her body on the couch, bearing signs of a brutal beating on her face. As Gabriel threw off the blanket covering his sister's body, he was horrified by what he saw. Campira was wearing only her underwear, and her body was covered in numerous bruises. Several details caught his attention. There were drops of blood around her, although her body and underwear appeared clean, as if she had recently bathed. Additionally, Campira's head was almost completely shaved, which struck Gabriel as strange, as his sister was known to take great care of her hair. Gabriel reported the incident to the police and then called his mother to break the news to Margarita. Paramedics and police arrived, confirmed Campira's death, and restricted access to the scene. The family was stunned by grief, struggling to come to terms with what happened. Their eyes reflected sadness and a glimmer of hope for justice. The investigation was complicated by inconsistencies between the crime scene and the initial assumption of suicide. The police meticulously examined every detail to unravel the truth. The police initially suspected suicide, but Campira's family disputed this, finding it impossible to believe that a young, cheerful woman would take such a drastic step. Campira's family was convinced that her death was not a suicide, but a violent crime. A strand of hair found on her body that did not match anyone in the house reinforced their suspicions. They demanded a more thorough investigation, which was granted. A second forensic examination confirmed their fears, revealing that Campira was strangled and that the suicide scene was staged. The evidence included marks on her trachea and neck, bruises indicating a beating, and the absence of a strand of hair. The police launched an investigation, and Campira's aunt, Sandra, worked with the deputy prosecutor to have the case transferred to the prosecutor's office. However, progress was slow. Later, Sandra was called back to the prosecutor's office and informed that she and her brother, Gabriel, could be plaintiffs in the case. Campira's children were left with their grandmother after the tragedy. To shield them from painful memories, they were transferred to a new school. However, time alone didn't heal their wounds. 2 months later, the family was allowed to visit the apartment where Kempira's body was found, collecting her belongings and possibly uncovering clues. Her laptop was found, but its data had been deleted. Fortunately, her iPad was password protected, and the last photos she took before her death were recovered. One disturbing photo showed Kempira lying next to Jorge on the same sofa where her body was later found. Further investigation of the photos revealed more evidence. In one image, Jorge was seen holding a skull-shaped container that was later discovered in the apartment's freezer. He was also shown strangling Kempira with one hand. Drawers in the desk yielded sketches of tattoos Jorge planned to get, further hinting at his possible involvement in the crime. The public was outraged when Jorge was released on bail in February 2009, sparking widespread anger. Many realized that if he had been detained earlier, the young women might still be alive. The Kempira and Young families continued to demand justice for their loved ones on social media, gathering over 13,000 supporters on a memorial page. 10 months after his escape, Jorge was finally caught on October 24, 2017. His arrest was unexpected, occurring during a routine patrol by the National Civilian Police in Livingston, Guatemala. The officers were patrolling the streets when they noticed a suspicious man who appeared to be homeless. A routine check of his documents and fingerprints revealed a shocking truth. The man was on the international wanted list with a high danger level. Jorge was immediately arrested and taken to the immigration center in Guatemala City, where he was detained pending further action. The Guatemalan authorities quickly contacted their Mexican counterparts to initiate the extradition process. According to the head of the Guatemalan police, Pablo Castillo, Jorge had been hiding under a bridge in western Guatemala, living on the streets and relying on the kindness of tourists for survival. The next day, October 25th, Jorge was transported to the Mexican border city of Chiapas, where he was handed over to the Mexican authorities. After crossing the border, Jorge was taken to Mexico City, marking the successful completion of the extradition process and the delivery of justice. Jorge appeared in court to face charges for his alleged crimes. A reporter managed to ask him a few questions, but Jorge responded with a complete denial of any wrongdoing, claiming he was unaware of the charges against him. This was despite being taken to court on October 26th for a preventive measure, specifically for the murder of Kempira. During the trial, the prosecution presented strong evidence of Jorge's involvement in the crime. The investigation revealed that Jorge had brutally beaten the victim with an unknown object before strangling her to death. The prosecutor classified the crime as a feminicide, made worse by the fact that Jorge had a romantic relationship with the victim. The prosecutor also pointed out that Jorge had a prior conviction for theft and was possibly involved in the death of another ex-girlfriend, Jan. Despite the overwhelming evidence and arguments against Jorge, his lawyer proposed an alternative explanation that Jorge was mentally unstable and needed a psychological evaluation. This move came as the community awaited justice, expecting a suitable punishment for the perpetrator. After thoroughly examining the evidence, witness testimonies, and arguments, the judge turned his attention to Jorge and his lawyer. He asked how long it would take to complete the psychological evaluation. Following a consultation, Jorge's lawyer agreed that Jorge would attend all subsequent court hearings. Upon reviewing all materials and considering both sides, the judge rendered a verdict. There was sufficient evidence from the prosecutor to hold Jorge accountable for his crimes. The court ordered the investigation to continue and gave a 4-month deadline to gather new evidence. Meanwhile, Jorge was taken into custody and held at a pre-trial detention center. Despite Jorge's arrest and guilty verdict, the Kempira and Jan families faced a lengthy and challenging process ahead. In August 2019, an oral hearing was held in Jorge's case. His lawyer asked the court to disregard the videos that showed Jorge entering and leaving Kempira's house on the day she was murdered. They claimed that these videos were incomplete, taken from a 30-hour recording at the crime scene, and could not be used to prove Jorge's guilt. The videos had been given to the victim's family by a neighbor who recorded them. The family then passed them on to the police, who brought only partial recordings to court. The police had lost the original disc. Jorge's lawyer alleged that the Mexico City prosecutor's office had concealed this information, which only came to light on the day of the hearing. The defense lawyer argued that the materials used to obtain the arrest warrant were unlawful. Specifically, the lawyer claimed that a key video was given to the Kempira family rather than the judicial authorities, and therefore could not be used as evidence. Despite this, The supervisory judge rejected the defense's petition after considering the prosecution's arguments and the testimony of Camper's friends and neighbors. Additionally, the court considered 2 witness statements, but did not accept them as evidence. The case proceeded, and Jorge was allowed to appeal the decision and present the same arguments again. Meanwhile, the young family was dealing with their own separate case. A ban on violence against women was established in Mexico City, thanks in part to advocacy from several groups, including the Mexican Institute of Human Rights and Democracy and the Center for Justice. This new decree was influenced by multiple high-profile crimes, including the murder of Yen. As a result, her case was forwarded to a Mexico City court for trial. Nearly 7 years after Yang's murder, charges were formally brought against her suspected killer, Jorge, in May 2021. Shortly thereafter, a judge ordered his arrest for his role in her murder. Despite these developments, Jorge's defense team was able to significantly slow down the investigation and prosecution. 9 years after Yang's death, Jorge Humberto Martinez Cortez was sentenced to 52 years and 6 months in prison in November 2023 for taking Yang's life. While the Yang family has finally received justice, Camper's family still faces a lengthy process. A trial had been scheduled for April 2022 at the detention center where Jorge was being held. Activists were resolute that this time the perpetrator would not evade accountability. Jorge's lawyers have successfully delayed the hearing once again, which was set to take place on January 29, 2024. Over 50 witnesses were expected to be called to testify, but for now, there is no update on the status of the hearing in the media. Jorge's family remains hopeful that he will eventually be held accountable for his actions. While nothing can bring Camper back, they seek justice and want to ensure that her death does not go unpunished. The case of Becky Friedli. On September 17, 2006, at 9:51 p.m., a passerby saw large clouds of smoke in the distance and quickly called emergency services. The smoke turned out to be a fire at the Friedli family home. Firefighters quickly extinguished the blaze, but it was too late. Vicky Friedli, 53 years old, and her husband, John Hayward, 55 years old, had died. Forensic experts later revealed that Vicky had been attacked in the head, and John had suffered injuries from being attacked in the chest. The case became even more grisly when the burned body of 18-year-old Becky Friedli, Vicky's daughter, was discovered. Her body was found in a wheelbarrow outside the house, and experts have not been able to determine the cause of her death. The house that burned down belonged to Ron, who had built it for his family, including his wife Vicky and their 3 daughters, Drew, Tanya, and Becky. He had chosen a safe and quiet location in the mountains to provide his daughters with space to play and entertain themselves. Vicky was a devoted mother, teaching her daughters to cook and assisting them with household tasks. She enjoyed gardening, sewing, and preparing delicious meals. The family seemed happy, but over time Ron and Vicky grew apart. After 13 years of marriage, they divorced and Ron moved out, leaving the house to Vicky and their daughters. Sisters Drew and Tanya eventually moved out of their mother's house, leaving their youngest sister Becky behind. Shortly after, Vicky began a relationship with John Hayward, who also had an adult daughter. John moved into the Friedli home, and they all lived together until a tragic incident occurred in September 2006. Friends and acquaintances of the family were baffled by the crime, not knowing who could have committed it. Rumors spread throughout town, with some claiming that Ron was responsible for the fire. However, he denied any involvement and showed deep concern for Vicky and his daughter, often crying during interrogations. His older daughters, Drew and Tanya, did not believe their father could commit such a horrific act. Investigators asked Ron to take a polygraph test, which he agreed to and passed successfully. Police later reviewed Ron's phone records and determined he was about an 11-hour drive from the scene of the fire, leading them to rule him out as a suspect. Further investigation revealed that the target of the case was Becky. Her father, Ron, shared that she had been terrified of fire since she was very young. Once, while her mother was cooking soup, Becky accidentally spilled it on herself, resulting in a 3rd-degree burn that left a permanent scar. Since then, she had experienced intense fear whenever she saw fire. Becky's friend Jenny McDaniel told the police that she believed Robert Pape was responsible for the incident involving the Friedel family. Burned photographs were discovered at the scene, including one of Robert's. He was Becky's ex-boyfriend. They had a seemingly happy relationship during their 1.5 years of dating in high school. However, Robert's behavior became increasingly concerning over time. He grew excessively jealous and controlling. About 10 months before the incident, when Becky was on holiday with a friend, he would call her 20 to 30 times a night, demanding to know where she was and who she was with. In January 2006, Becky broke up with Robert. He found a new girlfriend but continued to call her to control her, which only made things worse. She told Jenny that he had come to her home 3 weeks before the tragedy and threatened her with violence. He told her that he didn't want to share her with anyone and that she should belong only to him. However, she and Jenny didn't take his statement seriously, thinking it was just a joke. After her death, Jenny informed the police about everything, but it turned out that they were already watching Robert, and he was on the list of suspects. Robert and Kristen maintained that they were not at or near Becky's house the night of the fire. However, Kristen later shared a different version of incident. They tried to stop by Becky's house, but found it closed. They then went to Kristen's house, where they spent the day playing video games. After 7 p.m., they drove to the high school to attend a game, but no one confirmed that they were there that day. According to cell phone records, at 7:13 p.m., Robert was at a different location than the one he claimed on the road leading to Becky's house. Meanwhile, Kristen's phones were turned off from 7:30 p.m. to 7:32 p.m. At the time, Robert was married to a woman named Sarah, whom he began dating shortly after his split from Becky. He was actively involved in his church, helping others, while Sarah dedicated her time to animal welfare. Kristen was also married. His father, John Smith, described him as a noble man who had served his country for 5 years in an elite army regiment. He became a hero in Afghanistan after saving the lives of 3 fellow soldiers and received an award for his bravery. He also earned a medal for injuries sustained from shrapnel during a grenade explosion, which severely damaged his arm. In 2012, Private Detective Luis Bolanos, a longtime colleague of Ron, offered to help Ron solve the case. He accepted Luis's help because he had lost faith in the police's ability to find the culprit. Detective Luis spoke with Becky's close friends and family, including her sisters and colleagues, and uncovered new crucial information. Becky's cousin, Daniela, recalled that the day before the fire, she called him to say that Robert had come to her workplace at the cafe and started bothering her. They had a fight that day, and he was even thrown out of the cafe. Detective Luis has been gathering information about Robert and Kristen. Their friends describe them as good people, but when they are together, they create a dangerous relationship. They had a particular interest in fire. One friend shared a concerning incident in which they set her mattress on fire, leaving her frightened and angry with them. Investigators discovered that Robert had sent a disturbing text message to his girlfriend, Sarah, who was in a complicated relationship with another man. In the message, he suggested that if he knew where the other boy lived, they could professionally burn his house down. Investigators suggested that Robert and Kristen intended to confront Becky, and that Vicky and John happened to be there. Evidence showed that they attacked Becky near her house, forced her into a car, and set her on fire. Police found a business card with Kristen's DNA at the location where Becky was discovered. Inside the house, they attacked and killed Vicky along with John. They then set the house on fire and fled the scene. 6 months later, the district attorney's office subpoenaed Robert Pape and Kristen Smith, charging them with the crime. However, the families of Robert and Kristen remained skeptical about their involvement and decided to advocate for their release. Robert's attorney argued that the charges against him were based on hearsay and unreliable evidence. The lawyer claimed that Daniela had lied about Robert visiting her at work the day before the incident and that they had argued. Daniela's testimony could not be verified, and Robert's text message to Sarah about burning down her friend's house was simply a joke. The attorney also claimed that he was not jealous or controlling, that they had broken up, and that he was happy in his new relationship with Sarah. Kristen Smith's attorney contended that he had no motive to commit the crime, as Becky was neither his girlfriend nor a friend, and he held no ill feelings toward her. The attorney pointed out that the fact that Robert and Kristen did not use their cell phones that evening did not prove that they were at Becky's house, since they were playing games and did not have their phones with them. However, Robert's phone was recorded by cell towers as ringing at 7:13 p.m. near Becky's home. FBI experts noted that cell phones at high altitudes, like Becky's house, can sometimes connect to different towers. But this did not matter because there was physical evidence that Kristen was near her house, a business card with his DNA on it. His attorney countered that Becky could have taken the card from Kristen earlier and suggested that she might have lost it near her house during a walk. The attorney suggested that Becky's close friend, Javier, might be responsible for the Friedel family's deaths. Javier was the first person to inform the police that Robert and Christine were going on a hike with Becky. Friends of Becky said that Javier was in love with her and wanted a serious relationship, but she only viewed him as a friend. Robert and Christine's attorneys noted that there was evidence that Javier was near Becky's house that night, as he was tracked via a phone call. Additionally, Javier's father worked as an investigator in the district attorney's office, raising concerns about bias, but they asserted that Javier was not involved in the crime. Instead, he assisted the investigation and was cooperative throughout. It was revealed that Javier was indeed in the area that evening because he intended to join Becky for the hike with Robert and Kristen. However, when he called Becky to confirm, she told him not to come. After that call, he decided to turn around and go back home. The court proceedings continued, and Robert and Kristen remained in jail. Kristen's father visited him every Saturday. Soon, Kristen became a father, but missed the birth of his daughter, Zoe. Meanwhile, a new prosecutor took over the case and urgently called for the charges against Robert and Kristen to be dropped. Just 2 hours later, they were released. Robert was greeted by his family, including his parents and wife, Sarah. A year later, by the end of 2015, Robert and Sarah divorced. In June 2016, both Robert and Kristen were arrested again for the triple murder and arson of the Friedley house. This arrest was based on a witness who claimed that Kristen had confessed to him about the crime. Years later, in January 2018, forensic experts used modern technology to match fingerprints that had not been available in 2006. The trial for the case began in April 2018, where Robert and Kristen pleaded not guilty. The court proceedings lasted about a month, and the jury deliberated for 10 days before reaching a verdict. On August 10, 2018, nearly 12 years after the Friedel family was killed, Robert Pape and Kristen Smith were found guilty of a premeditated crime, and both received life sentences without the possibility of parole. The case of Isabella Rodriguez. Isabella Rodriguez was born in Colombia in 1975 and moved to Florida with her family in the 1990s. They obtained U.S. residency and eventually citizenship in 2002 when Isabella was 27. She married William Hellman, but they divorced in 2015 after a decade together. Isabella then met Louis Bennett online, and they began a romantic relationship. In 2016, Isabella and Louis had a daughter named Amelia. 6 months later, they purchased an apartment in Delray Beach, a city on Florida's Atlantic coast. They married the following month in February 2017. At the time, Isabella worked as a real estate agent and Louis owned a small solar panel company. On April 30th, 2017, Isabella flew to the Caribbean island of St. Martin to meet Louis, leaving their 9-month-old daughter with relatives. They planned to spend a week on the water, returning home to Florida on Louis's sailing catamaran. After stopping in the British Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico, they arrived in Cuba, where they stayed for a few days. On May 14th, the catamaran set sail from Veradero, Cuba, bound for Florida. Isabella called her sister 3 hours later to say she would be home the next day. At around 1 a.m., Louis sent out a distress signal to the U.S. Coast Guard, reporting that his ship had collided with an unknown object and was sinking. He also reported that his wife, Isabella, was missing. A Coast Guard helicopter crew located Louis in a life raft around 4 a.m. and took him to Key West Island, the southernmost part of Florida. The catamaran was found floating upside down at dawn, but had not yet sunk. During an interview with investigators, Louis explained that he and Isabella took turns keeping watch. At the time of the accident, it was Isabella's turn, and Louis was asleep in his stateroom. He woke up to the sound of the collision and rushed on deck, but couldn't find Isabella. He called out her name, but she didn't respond. Louis suspected that the loose mast might have knocked her overboard. Louis also stated that the last time he saw Isabella, she was wearing a life jacket. When he was rescued, a Coast Guard rescue swimmer noticed that Louis's backpack was unusually heavy. Upon inspection, officers found 225 collectible coins in the backpack, but their origin was unclear. Isabella Hellman went missing on May 15th, prompting a 4-day search and rescue operation by the Coast Guard. As no signs of her were found, the operation was officially ended on May 18th. The authorities were suspicious when Louis Bennett, Isabella's husband, requested a letter from the Coast Guard stating that his wife was presumed dead just 24 hours after the search had ended. The Coast Guard denied the request as it was outside their jurisdiction to issue such a certificate. 6 days later, Louis announced on TV that he was traveling to Cuba to rent a boat and continue the search for his wife on his own. However, just 3 days after making this statement, Luis claimed to have already returned from Cuba and met with Isabella's sister, saying he had checked hospitals but found no signs of her. Luis expressed his despair and resignation to the situation, stating he was struggling to accept that his wife might be gone. He described Isabella as his soulmate and someone he thought he would be with forever. The next day, Luis and the police attempted to retrieve his daughter from his wife's family, but they refused to relinquish her. Luis ultimately took custody of his daughter with the help of the police, despite the scandal surrounding him. During the dispute, Isabella's sister repeatedly accused Luis of being responsible for Isabella's death. Luis's calm behavior and actions after his wife's disappearance raised suspicions among both Isabella's family and the police. Investigations revealed that Isabella and Luis had frequent arguments after the birth of their child. Family, friends, and neighbors all confirmed this. Isabella had confided in loved ones that Luis wanted to move to Australia, but she was opposed to leaving the United States. On May 30th, Luis gave an interview in which he denied any involvement in his wife's disappearance. He claimed they had plans for a happy life together, but now he was alone and their daughter would grow up without a mother. While investigating Isabella's disappearance, the police also looked into the origin of valuable coins found among Luis's belongings. It was discovered that Luis had previously worked as a first mate on a yacht. The captain of that yacht had a collection of 617 rare coins worth around $100,000, which was discovered a year earlier. While the yacht was unoccupied and docked in the Caribbean, thieves broke in and stole the coins on board. Although the perpetrator was not caught at the time, the yacht's captain later identified the coins found on Luis Bennett as part of the stolen loot, now that the FBI was investigating their origin. This new information led the FBI to obtain a search warrant for Luis's apartment. Previously, 225 coins had been found among his belongings when he was rescued. On June 16, 2017, the search of his apartment uncovered an additional 162 gold coins hidden in a closet. Meanwhile, Luis had relocated to England, where his parents lived, and had taken his daughter with him. However, due to financial difficulties, he returned to the United States and settled into an apartment valued at $125,000, while also receiving insurance payments for a lost catamaran. On August 28, 2017, Luis Bennett was arrested in Florida and charged with stealing coins. He pleaded not guilty. A few days later, a federal judge set his bail at $250,000, which Luis was unable to pay. As a result, he remained in custody while awaiting trial. Additionally, Luis attempted to have his wife declared dead. Luis benefited from his wife Isabella's disappearance by gaining control of their shared property and bank accounts. However, the judge refused to declare Isabella dead twice as the investigation into her disappearance was ongoing. In a separate case, Luis pleaded guilty to stealing coins and transporting them to the United States in November 2017. Luis's parents asked the judge to be lenient when sentencing him, citing the fact that his daughter had already lost her mother. In February 2018, Luis received a sentence of 7 months in prison followed by 3 years of probation. On the same day, Luis was charged with second-degree murder in Isabella's death. Authorities believed he intentionally caused the catamaran they were on to crash, which was allegedly a staged event to cover up the crime. The prosecutor's case was based on a claim that Luis wanted to inherit Isabella's wealth to pay off his debts and take their young daughter to live in Australia. Isabella had expressed fear of her husband in text messages a few months before her death, stating that she felt he no longer respected her. She expressed fear about returning home. In a message sent months before her disappearance, Isabella wrote, "If you no longer like or love me, let's resolve this immediately. Sad how you treated me the entire time." An inspection of the catamaran before it sank revealed that the portholes below the waterline were left open. The damage to the dual holes seemed to originate from within the vessel, near the waterline. The waterline is the point where the surface of the water meets the hull of a floating vessel. An expert hired by the FBI analyzed photos and videos taken by the U.S. Coast Guard of the catamaran before it sank. The expert concluded that Luis's account of the events was not credible. The analysis suggested that the vessel did not sink due to accidental damage, but rather appeared to have been intentionally scuttled. A professor of nautical architecture and ocean engineering at the Udata's Coast Guard Academy testified in court that the Coast Guard found no evidence of a collision that could have caused the catamaran to sink. Divers inspecting the vessel were cautious due to the risk of collapse, and eventually, the catamaran sank to a depth of over 4,000 feet, preventing a detailed inspection. 2 years after Isabella Hellman's disappearance, A judge officially declared her dead. Palm Beach County Circuit Judge Scott Suskauer issued a series of orders stating that Isabella was presumed to have died on May 14, 2017. Despite the passage of time, Isabella's body has not been found and she has not contacted her family. Based on the available evidence, it is presumed that Isabella is deceased. The statement said, in January 2019, U.S. District Judge Federico Moreno suspended Lewis's February sentencing hearing in Miami and rescheduled it for May 28, saying he would not act until Isabella's family could personally visit her daughter Amelia, who turned 3 in July. In November 2019, Lewis pleaded guilty to manslaughter and the second-degree murder charge against him was dropped. Before the plea deal, he faced a possible life sentence for second-degree murder, but the new charges limited his maximum sentence to 8 years in prison. According to a document filed with the court, Lewis claimed he didn't remember what he was doing when he discovered his wife was missing. He didn't search for her on the catamaran or in the water, nor did he use flares to signal for help. Instead, Lewis packed his belongings onto a life raft and then intentionally damaged the catamaran to make it flood, allowing him to escape on the raft. Prosecutors stated that Lewis waited 45 minutes after realizing his wife was missing to call for help. Notably, the U.S. Attorney's Office pointed out that Lewis was an experienced sailor with training in emergency procedures, having previously sailed from St. Martin to Australia. Don't understand why he failed to use his knowledge to respond to the emergency situation. Prosecutor states that Lewis admitted to being negligent in handing over control of the catamaran to his inexperienced wife, Isabella, resulting in her falling overboard and drowning. Despite being an experienced sailor with a Royal Yachting Association certification, Lewis failed to ensure Isabella wore proper safety gear. In contrast, Isabella had no formal sailing training or experience, and Lewis knew it. Lewis received training in emergency procedures, including manned overboard protocols and night sailing safety, but Isabella did not. The prosecutor notes that only Lewis knows the full story of what happened on the catamaran that night. Following Lewis' guilty plea, Isabella's family, through their lawyer, expressed their immense pain and asked Lewis to show remorse. They stated that while Lewis can never undo the harm caused by taking Isabella away, he continues to cause additional pain by depriving them of contact with his and Isabella's daughter, Amelia. Isabella Hellman's family is grieving and missing her dearly. Although they have had limited contact with her daughter Amelia through 3 FaceTime calls, they have not been able to see or hug her in a long time. They long to be reunited with Amelia and provide her with love and care. As a part of their family, they want to be with her. They urged Lewis Bennett to do the right thing. Lewis Bennett, Isabella's husband, was sentenced to 8 years in prison on May 28, 2019, after pleading guilty to manslaughter in connection with her death. During his sentencing hearing, Bennett apologized sincerely to Isabella's family for putting them through immense pain. He acknowledged that his actions led to a devastating tragedy for which he is truly remorseful. Lewis admitted to making poor decisions that worsened the situation. He expressed regret in federal court in Miami, where he waived his right to appeal as part of his plea bargain. Before the judge delivered the sentence, Lewis requested the opportunity to be released from prison early so that he could continue to care for their daughter, Amelia. Lewis expressed a desire to care for his daughter, saying, "I want to raise her in a way that honors my late wife's wishes." However, the judge ruled against him, sentencing him to 8 years in prison followed by 3 years of supervised release. As a result, Amelia will remain with her paternal grandparents in England for the time being. Joseph, Summer, Johnny, and Joseph Jr. were a joyful family, living in a lovely new home in Fallbrook, California. Joseph, the family's main provider, ran a successful decorative fountain business. February 4, 2010, began as a regular day for the family. Joseph called his father, Patrick, to explain that he was running late for a business lunch. Meanwhile, Summer had been in touch with her sister, who had recently given birth, telling her that she was busy setting things up in their new home. Over the next few days, communication from Joseph and Summer to their relatives abruptly stopped. While some thought it was simply due to their busy lives and caring for 2 young children, Joseph's father, Patrick, found the situation odd. He had a close relationship with his son and wasn't used to being ignored. As his concern grew, he asked his other son, Michael, to check on Joseph's home. At first, Michael didn't share the same level of worry, believing that his brother was simply caught up in daily tasks and would reconnect soon. Patrick, however, persisted, and eventually Michael agreed to visit the house. When Michael arrived, he noticed that the family car was gone, but their dogs were still at the house, seemingly uncared for. The doors were locked, but Michael managed to get inside through a window. Inside, things were off. There was spoiled food in the kitchen and popcorn scattered in the living room. Despite these oddities, Michael initially thought the family had gone on a trip. However, it was unusual that they hadn't told anyone. So Michael alerted the authorities to his brother's disappearance. The police found no sign of forced entry or violence, though it seemed the family had left in a hurry. By February 8th, the family's car was discovered abandoned near the border crossing between the US and Mexico. Surveillance footage from the border showed a family of 4 walking into Mexico, but the video quality was poor, leaving the police uncertain if it was indeed the McStays. Further investigation revealed that Summer had recently searched for information about Mexico on her computer, leading to speculation that the family had left voluntarily. However, Joseph's father, Patrick, firmly believed that his son would never leave without informing anyone. Joseph's mother, after viewing the footage, was sure the man shown was not Joseph, based on his walk. Michael and Susan took over Joseph's business, while Patrick felt increasingly left out, especially as he was estranged from Susan and had little contact with Michael. Months passed with no solid leads, and the case was handed over to the FBI by April 2010. Unfortunately, the authorities still considered the family's disappearance a voluntary departure, resulting in a lack of exhaustive efforts to find them. The absence of any clear evidence of a crime also prevented police from obtaining access to Joseph's financial records. For more than 3 years, the case remained cold until November 13, 2013, when a motorcyclist stumbled upon a horrific discovery while riding in the Mojave Desert. He found what appeared to be a child's skull and promptly notified the San Bernardino Sheriff's Department. Upon further investigation, authorities uncovered 2 shallow graves containing the remains of 4 people, 2 adults, and 2 children. Dental records confirmed that the remains belonged to Joseph, Summer, Johnny, and Joseph Jr. Alongside the remains, a 3-pound sledgehammer was found, identified as the murder weapon. Forensic examinations concluded that the family had died from blunt force trauma, likely having been tortured before their deaths. The autopsy revealed that young Joseph Jr. had suffered multiple severe blows to the head, while Joseph Sr. was found with an electrical cord wrapped around his neck. With this grim discovery, the case took a dark turn and was now considered a homicide. Investigators began reconstructing the family's final months by interviewing friends, family, and examining phone records and security footage. A key breakthrough came when security footage from a neighbor's camera revealed that the last person to meet with Joseph on February 4th was his business partner, Charles Chase Merritt. Prior to the discovery of the bodies, Chase had been interviewed by authorities, during which he claimed to have spoken with Joseph on the phone at least twice on the day of the disappearance. Chase had also told the media that Joseph was his best friend, and in one interview, he mentioned being the last person to see Joseph, a statement that raised suspicion among detectives. Chase's behavior after the disappearance was concerning. In an early police interview, he referred to Joseph in the past tense, saying he was my best friend. When questioned about this after the bodies were found, Chase claimed he hadn't realized he was speaking that way. Chase had also told police that on February 4th, he and Joseph had a business meeting over lunch to discuss financial matters. During that meeting, Chase said Joseph gave him physical copies of checks for ongoing projects. Further investigation into these checks revealed discrepancies. Digital records indicated that while the checks were dated February 4th, they had actually been written several days after the family disappeared. This led investigators to suspect that Chase had forged the checks to make it appear as though they had been issued before the disappearance. Moreover, detectives uncovered that Chase had a gambling addiction and had been stealing money from Joseph's business accounts for months. It was speculated that Joseph had discovered this, leading to tension between the two and possibly providing Chase with a motive for murder. Police later uncovered that Chase had also issued checks totaling over $21,000 from Joseph McStay's business account in the days following the family's murder. Merritt then went on gambling sprees, losing significant amounts of money in casinos. A bank's customer service employees also revealed to investigators that someone claiming to be Joseph McStay had called to request the complete deletion of his account and all related information. However, the caller failed to provide the correct password, so the request couldn't be processed. When authorities traced the call, they discovered it came not from Joseph's phone, but from Charles Merritt's. Further investigation revealed that on February 1st, Joseph had sent an email claiming that Chase owed him almost $43,000. Adding to this, cell phone data placed Merritt in the Mojave Desert 2 days after the McStay family disappeared. Authorities believed Merritt knew the area well, having grown up nearby. During the investigation, police also received a DNA profile from the McStay family car. DNA found on the steering column and gear shift matched Charles Merritt. With mounting evidence against Merritt, detectives concluded that he had murdered the McStay family. The theory proposed by investigators was that Merritt had killed the family with a sledgehammer, transported their bodies to the Mojave Desert, and buried them in shallow graves. He then drove the family's car to the border near Mexico, abandoning it there to mislead investigators into believing that the family had fled to Mexico. It's also believed that Merritt was the one who conducted searches about Mexico on Summers' computer. On November 5, 2014, Charles Merritt was charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder. Though he vehemently denied the accusations, he was arrested and brought to trial. However, the trial faced numerous delays as Merritt fired several of his attorneys and even attempted to represent himself at one point. Over the span of 2 years, he cycled through 5 different lawyers. The trial finally began on January 7, 2019. Prosecutors entered the trial confident in their case, presenting substantial evidence linking Merritt to the murders, along with a clear motive. They argued that Joseph had confronted Merritt about the money he had been stealing from the business, threatening to report him to the authorities. Merritt, who had a criminal record involving theft and fraud, panicked, fearing a lengthy prison sentence. As a result, prosecutors suggested he decided to kill Joseph and his entire family to silence them. The prosecution believed that Merritt first killed Joseph and then lured Summer and the children to their deaths. After murdering the family, Merritt hid the bodies for 2 days, during which time he accessed Joseph's bank account and issued the fraudulent checks. On February 6th, he allegedly transported the bodies to the desert, dug 2 shallow graves, and buried them along with the murder weapon. He later abandoned the family car near the border, though his DNA left inside the vehicle would become crucial evidence. During the trial, the prosecution presented security footage that supposedly showed Merritt's truck leaving the McStay residence. However, the video was blurry, leading to debate over whether it truly was Merritt's truck. The defense seized on this and other inconsistencies, including the unclear location of the murders. Prosecutors could not definitively say if the killings occurred in the family home or elsewhere, such as the desert. Merritt's defense team argued that he had an alibi. His girlfriend at the time testified that Merritt was with her at home on the night of February 4, 2010. His daughter also stated that she remembered her father being home that night. As for Merritt's cell phone data placing him in the Mojave Desert on February 6th, the defense explained that he could have been in the area to visit his sister. Juanita, Chase's sister, testified that her brother frequently visited her, though she couldn't recall if he had visited on that specific day. However, prosecutors confronted Juanita with a recorded police interview from 2013, in which she claimed that Charles rarely visited her and hadn't done so for 5 years, which contradicted her trial testimony. The defense also tried several tactics to derail the trial, including accusing prosecutors of withholding evidence and requesting that key figures in the case be removed. However, the judge overseeing the case rejected these motions, allowing the trial to proceed. Chase Merritt's defense attorneys argued that the prosecution failed to thoroughly investigate other individuals who had motives to harm Joseph McStay. They pointed to 3 men they considered persons of interest, with the first being Joseph's brother, Michael McStay. When Michael took the stand, Charles Merritt's attorney asked him several pointed questions, suggesting he could be responsible for the crime. The lawyer inquired about Michael's relationship with his brother, to which both Michael and the rest of the family asserted that it was good. However, the defense raised doubts, questioning why Michael did not immediately go to check on his brother's home, and why he was slow to report the family's disappearance. In response, Michael admitted that he hadn't been overly concerned at first, thinking his brother had simply gone on a trip with his family. The defense also suggested that the truck seen in the security footage could have been Michael's, not Charles'. But a particularly strange detail that led some people to suspect Michael was that before the family's bodies were found, he told officers that he hoped they weren't buried in shallow graves. This statement caused significant debate, as the McStay family was indeed discovered in shallow graves in the Mojave Desert. Many found it suspicious that Michael could have imagined this scenario with such accuracy. However, Joseph and Michael's parents dismissed the comment as an unfortunate coincidence, while others found it highly unusual. In addition to Michael, the defense also pointed the finger at Joseph's other business partner, a man named Dan Kavanaugh, who managed Joseph's online sales. Dan, known as Dan the Hacker due to his computer expertise, worked with Joseph to promote and sell their products online. His compensation was a percentage of the online sales. Dan had previously been on police radar when his ex-girlfriend Tracy accused him of confessing to the murders in early 2018. Tracy's claims were dismissed, however, as she had a history of substance abuse and was on bad terms with Dan, leading the authorities to believe she might be trying to falsely incriminate him. According to Charles Merritt's defense team, Dan had a strong motive to harm Joseph. At the end of 2009, Joseph and Dan had clashed over profit distribution. Dan believed he was entitled to a share of not just the online sales, but all sales, while Joseph disagreed and initially refused to pay more. Dan allegedly threatened to ruin Joseph's online business by redirecting his website's traffic to adult sites. Ultimately, Joseph agreed to give Dan more money, including his BMW and additional payments. The last of these payments was due around the time of the family's disappearance. After the murders, Dan continued to work with Susan, Michael, and Charles to keep the business running, but he later sold the company in June 2011, pocketing over $100,000. The defense argued that Dan's exclusion from certain projects and lack of payments could have pushed him over the edge. However, Dan had a solid alibi. He was vacationing in Hawaii with his girlfriend during the time of the murders. His ex-girlfriend testified that they were together on February 4, 2010, and posted photos to Facebook as evidence. While some people questioned the validity of social media posts as proof, the ex-girlfriend maintained that she had no reason to lie for Dan as they were no longer together and had parted on bad terms. The police eventually confirmed that Dan had indeed been in Hawaii at the time of the killings. During the trial, the defense also brought up Joseph's ex-wife's partner, suggesting that he too could have been involved. Joseph had a son named Jonah with his ex-wife, and tensions between Joseph and her new partner had escalated prior to the murders. Nevertheless, the police ruled him out as a suspect. Despite the defense's efforts to shift attention away from Charles Merritt by June 2019, the jury found Merritt guilty on 4 counts of first-degree murder. Before the sentencing hearing, the victims' families gave emotional statements. Patrick, Joseph's father, addressed Merritt, saying that Joseph had done so much to help him and his family, particularly when Merritt faced legal troubles in 2009. Susan, Joseph's mother, called Merritt a despicable monster who had brutally killed 2 innocent children, her grandchildren. She labeled him a coward and a baby killer. Summer's sister tearfully shared how their family would forever be scarred by the loss of their loved ones. Joseph's eldest son, Jonah, also spoke, recounting the devastating impact of losing his father, stepmother, and younger siblings when he was just 12 years old. After hearing these victim impact statements, Merritt asked to speak. Through tears, he insisted on his innocence, declaring that he did not commit the murders and did not deserve what was happening to him. "I didn't do it," he said. "With God as my witness, I will prove everyone wrong." He added that he loved Joseph and would never have hurt him or his family. Merritt's sentencing was delayed after he once again requested to dismiss his attorney, though the judge rejected this motion. His legal team also filed for a new trial, accusing the prosecution of misconduct, but this request was also denied. Finally, on January 21, 2020, after years of delays, the San Bernardino Superior Court sentenced Charles Merritt, then 62 years old, to death. Despite the death sentence, it is unlikely that Merritt will ever be executed, as California has not carried out an execution since 2006. Instead, Merritt will likely spend the rest of his life in the death row. Today we'll delve into the mysterious case of Donata Machado, a twisted cold case from 1984 that was finally solved after almost 4 decades. East Windsor is a township located in Mercer County, New Jersey. Situated in the central part of the state, it is known for its suburban character and proximity to major cities like Trenton and Princeton. East Windsor offers a blend of residential areas, commercial centers, and natural landscapes. The township is home to various parks, recreational facilities, and cultural attractions, providing residents and visitors with ample opportunities for outdoor activities and community engagement. But despite this idyllic setting, this place would become the home of a heinous crime. Donna D. Machado's journey began on October 16, 1964, in the town of East Windsor, nestled within Mercer County. She was the cherished daughter of Betty Lou Thompson Machado and Ronald Wayne Machado. As the years went by, Donna's family expanded with the arrival of a younger sister, Julie Machado, in 1969. Life took a turn when their mother, Betty, found love again and married a man named Garland. Together they formed a blended family. Donna and Julie embraced their new life, with her beloved stepfather by their side. Donna Michaud had a zest for life that radiated through her love for cooking and sewing. Alongside her job as a legal secretary, she harbored dreams of a career in modeling. For Julie, Donna was a shining star. Despite the challenges that came her way, Donna never lost her sparkle and continued to embrace life with open arms. Little did she know that her path would take an unexpected and tragic turn, forever altering the lives of those who cherished her. On February 25, 1984, it seemed like a typical Saturday night for 14-year-old Julie Michaud, who was relaxing at her family's home in East Windsor, when she noticed her 19-year-old sister, Donna D. Michaud's car parked outside. She joined her in the basement. Together they spent the night watching scary movies until 2 a.m. At that point, Julie went upstairs to her bed, ready to rest for the night. Their mother Betty and stepfather Garland were peacefully asleep upstairs during that time. They were unaware of any unusual sounds or disturbances emanating from the basement. The following day, on February 26, 1984, Donna was expected to go to work at a law firm, so her absence during the day didn't initially raise alarm bells. However, as dinner time arrived and Donna still hadn't returned home, her mother began to worry. Concerned for her daughter's well-being, decided to investigate by venturing downstairs to check the basement apartment. As Betty entered Donna's usually neat and organized apartment, she was greeted by a disarray of items scattered about. It was evident that a struggle had taken place within those walls. The sight of blood-stained clothes peeped together heightened her growing unease, prompting her to immediately contact the police. Once the police arrived at the scene, they meticulously combed through the entire basement, their eyes keenly scanning for any trace that could unravel the mystery. Their diligence paid off when they discovered faint fingerprints near a table close to the bed. Recognizing the potential significance of these fingerprints, they carefully collected them as evidence. Alongside the blood-stained clothes, they also uncovered traces of bodily fluid in the bedroom, an essential clue that held the promise of leading them closer to the identity of the perpetrator and help in finding Donna. In the search for answers, investigators made a grim discovery. In March 1984, when they found Donna Michaud's abandoned blood-stained car near a sewer plant roughly a mile away from her home. However, despite this lead, the mystery surrounding her disappearance endured. Investigators meticulously combed through countless records. They diligently interviewed the residents living in the vicinity of Donna Michaud's residence, determined to unearth any clue that could lead them to the truth. As fate would have it, the investigation took a significant turn when they suspected a number of people, including Nathaniel Harvey, a former worker at a nearby farm and resident of East Windsor. He had been apprehended and detained for his alleged involvement in a series of assaults and a chilling murder in the Plainsboro area. But all the leads, including Harvey, did not pan out at that time. The significant piece of evidence, the bodily fluid that investigators found in Donna Michaud's bedroom, also went for testing. However, the technology for DNA testing was not as advanced as it is today, and the testing conducted at that time lacked the precision needed to pinpoint the source of the bodily fluid. But the investigators didn't close the case and hoped that one day they would come up with some solid leads that would help them solve Donna Michaud's murder mystery. The weight of the tragedy became too much for Donna's stepfather, who tragically passed away just 6 months after Donna vanished, leaving the family to bear the weight of their grief alone. The family went to great lengths in their search for the killer. They hired private investigators, trackers, and even sought the help of psychics. They poured all their resources into the effort, spending every last penny they had. Their hope never wavered. They held on to the belief that somehow, maybe, just maybe, their loved one was still alive. They couldn't shake the thought that perhaps she was injured. After exhausting all possible avenues to finding the identity of the killer, seeking solace and a fresh start, Julie and her mother made the difficult decision to move to Texas in 1987. However, their journey to healing was further marred by misfortune when their storage unit was burglarized, robbing them of precious memories. The thieves callously snatched away family photos, cherished mementos, and 16 boxes filled with investigation files, adding another layer of pain. 11 years went by, but there was no news. But on April 2, 1995, police officers got a call from a Boy Scout troop about a body they found near Cranberry. It was not in good condition, almost completely decomposed. But when they got the dental records back, they couldn't believe they had found the most important part of the puzzle. They had been searching for the last decade. It was the body of Donna D. Michaud, concealed within a carpet in a wooded area near a cranberry farm, not far from where her car had been recovered. After her remains were sent for an autopsy, Initial findings indicated that Donna had tragically suffered a gunshot wound to the head. However, as the case investigation progressed, the dedicated experts at the Middle Assault Regional Medical Examiner's Office delved deeper into her remains. Through careful examination, they discovered that her cause of death was indeed a head injury, although it couldn't be definitively determined as a gunshot wound. Nevertheless, the cause of death was amended to evidence of homicidal violence, and her death continued to be classified as a homicide. With this crucial lead unable to yield conclusive results, the investigation gradually reached a standstill, and the case eventually fell into the abyss of unsolved mysteries. In February 2022, Mercer County Prosecutor Angelo Onofre directed the reopening of the Donna Machau case. The case was handed over to the Office of Public Integrity and Accountability Central Regional Cold Case Task Force, a dedicated group within the statewide cold case network established by the New Jersey Attorney General in 2019. As part of the reopened investigation, all relevant physical evidence, including DNA samples, was carefully resubmitted to the state police's Central Regional Laboratory. This step aimed to leverage advanced forensic techniques and technology in the pursuit of truth and justice. Modern DNA technology played a crucial role in shedding new light on the case. The evidence, the bodily fluid which was found from Donna Machau's bedroom, was carefully re-examined and it conclusively matched the DNA profile to Nathaniel Harvey. Astonishingly, his DNA was the only genetic material found in the room that should not have been present, according to the Attorney General's office. It was a breakthrough that provided clarity and closure to the long-standing mystery. Nathaniel Harvey, born in 1942 in East Windsor, had a troubled past right from the beginning. He had a knack for trouble and found himself behind bars for most of his life. In 1968, he got married, but the identity of his wife is not known. Living in East Windsor, Harvey had a long list of crimes to his name. He was also described as a daring intruder by the West Windsor police, and he had been convicted of assault. It was said that during his crimes, Harvey would sneak into unlocked homes where he would take young women hostage and commit acts of violence. The authorities always had their eyes on him, considering him a potential suspect in their search for justice. One such case was of Irene Schnaps, who was also a resident of East Windsor. During the years of 1984 and 1985, the local authorities were faced with a growing concern as a series of burglaries rattled Plainsboro, West Windsor, and nearby neighborhoods. The authorities were also grappling with the unsolved murder of Irene Schnaps and the perplexing disappearance of Donna Machau, who vanished from her family's East Windsor home. 16 months after Donna Machau's disappearance, tragedy struck again in East Windsor when Irene Schnaps, a 37-year-old woman who had recently lost her husband to cancer, was killed. The incident occurred overnight on Saturday, June 15, 1985, or in the early hours of the following day. Concerned for her well-being, one of Irene's colleagues at RCA Americom went to her apartment the next morning, June 16, 1985, on Research Way after she failed to show up for work. With trembling hands, he informed the police about the tragic scene that he had encountered. Inside the apartment, a heart-wrenching sight awaited the investigators. Irene Schnapp suffered a barrage of over 15 vicious blows to her head, inflicted by an axe or hatchet. The room bore gruesome evidence of the tragedy, with Irene's lifeless body lying on cloth in her blood-soaked bedroom. Amidst the chilling scene, a crimson-stained footprint on a pillowcase was discovered, becoming a vital clue that held the potential to unlock the mystery behind her tragic demise. Peter Stowisser, a 41-year-old man, stepped forward to share his account with the investigators. As a friendly acquaintance of Irene Schnapp's, he revealed that he may have been the last person to have seen her alive. Shortly after sharing his connection to Irene Schnapp's, Stowisser's life took an unexpected turn. The police began frequent visits to his doorstep and, one Saturday, June 17, 1985, Stillwasser found himself taken to the Middle Assault Prosecutor's office, where he spent the entire day under intense scrutiny, facing a barrage of questions regarding Irene's tragic murder. He confessed to developing feelings of attraction towards her, envisioning a potential romantic connection. However, Irene, still grieving the loss of her husband, expressed the need for time and space before considering any new relationships. As Stowisser eagerly anticipated the right moment to express his romantic feelings, he maintained a friendly connection with Irene. He extended invitations to his lively gatherings, hosting barbecues for neighbors and friends, in an effort to ensure she didn't feel alone. However, their potential relationship was abruptly shattered when Irene met her tragic end, testing suspicion upon Stowisser as the primary suspect. Law enforcement also obtained a search warrant for Stowisser's residence. During the search, they discovered a quilt that bore suspicious-looking stains, possibly blood-related. Additionally, from his car, investigators seized a pair of white work gloves and a metal strip exhibiting reddish spots. Upon conducting tests on the quilt, it was revealed to contain human blood, accompanied by hairs that seemed to match those of the victim. Stowasser, however, maintained that the stains on the quilt originated from menstrual blood belonging to another woman he was involved with. As the investigation progressed, Stowasser underwent a lie detector test, which he did not pass, although the results of such tests were not considered admissible in court. Additionally, it came to light that he had a history of serving time in jail for stalking a former girlfriend. However, the police eventually eliminated Stowasser as a primary suspect, largely due to a significant discrepancy in shoe sizes. Stowasser wore size 12 shoes, whereas a bloody footprint at the crime scene indicated a size 6 shoe. This unexpected mismatch in foot size shifted the focus of the investigation elsewhere. However, on October 28, 1985, the breakthrough in the case occurred. On that very day, Nathaniel Harvey embarked on a rampage through the southern part of West Windsor, ultimately leading to a significant turning point in the investigation. The initial call that reached the dispatch center reported an alarming incident in Dutch Neck Estates. It was a chilling account of a 13-year-old girl who had narrowly escaped an attempted abduction from her own home, and the man covered her mouth in an attempt to take her away. However, startled by the commotion, he fled the scene. After fleeing the home in Dutch Neck Estates, that man broke into another house, probably to hide from the police. He was confronted by the homeowner. He turned on the light and saw Nathaniel Harvey standing there threatening him with an axe. Sensing the imminent danger, Harvey swiftly pivoted, shattering the glass door with the powerful swing of the axe, and ran off into the woods. With the chilling affinity for axes, Harvey had developed a disturbing pattern of wielding these menacing tools to instill fear in his victims. Even when armed with a knife during one of the assaults he committed, he deceitfully claimed to possess an axe, further fueling the terror. It wasn't lost on the astute law enforcement officials that the murder weapon used in the Irene Schnepp's killing was believed to be an axe, adding another haunting connection to Harvey's modus operandi. A short time later, investigators diligently canvassed the area, and their sharp eyes caught sight of Harvey traversing a soybean field, and then ran off into the woods. The police swiftly descended upon the scene, converging on Harvey's location near the Princeton Arms shopping center. It was there at the intersection of Old Tretton Road and Dorchester Drive that a state trooper apprehended Harvey. During questioning, police learned of the extent of Harvey's one-man crime spree, confessed to a string of burglaries that had struck fear into the community. However, the extent of his depravity became even more harrowing as it revealed the details of a recent assault. Prior to the tragic murder of Irene, Harvey had abducted a young girl from East Windsor, forcefully taking her to an abandoned building nestled along Dutch Neck Road. He revealed that the victim, who was actually Donna Michaud, innocently stepped out onto her deck to indulge in a cigarette, only to be seized by his relentless grip. After Harvey's arrest, the 13-year-old girl was called to identify if Harvey was the man who attacked her on October 28, 1985. Through her courageous testimony, she ultimately identified Harvey as her assailant. The authorities made a difficult decision not to pursue charges in the case due to the extremely brutal and perverse nature of the attack, considering the potential impact it would have on the victim's well-being. However, a breakthrough came when investigators finally received a search warrant and conducted a thorough search of Harvey's car in November 1985, which was located in the Princeton Arms apartment complex. Inside, they uncovered compelling evidence, directly linking him to the Irene Schnepp's murder. Alongside stolen items from various recent burglaries, a significant discovery was made. A Seiko watch that was positively identified as belonging to Irene and having been taken from her apartment at the time of the tragic murder. This crucial find provided a solid connection between Harvey and the crime. In an intriguing twist, it was discovered that Harvey's wife resided in the same apartment complex as Irene. However, this information had to be kept confidential due to his wife's reliance on state assistance. Additionally, authorities asserted that Harvey initially admitted to the murder of Irene during his questioning at the West Windsor Police Headquarters, where he was confronted with various matters. It was during this intense moment that Harvey requested to speak with his father, who offered him crucial advice to do the right thing. In a surprising turn of events, Harvey then made a confession regarding the Irene Schnepp's murder. Following Harvey's apprehension, the quilt that had been seized from Stowasser, the neighbor of Irene, who was also seen as a person of interest in the murder, was returned to him. Additionally, the glove and metal strip, confiscated from his car, underwent testing by prosecutors, revealing negative results for the presence of blood. In 1986, Harvey was convicted for the murder of Irene Schnaps. However, 4 years later in 1990, the state Supreme Court overturned his conviction, stating that his confession had been obtained without properly informing him of his Miranda rights. Harvey, who now maintained that his confession was coerced, immediately retracted his statement. This turn of events raised concerns about the validity of his initial confession and ignited a debate about whether he should have been reminded of his Miranda rights after speaking with his father. The question of Harvey's confession became a point of contention as conflicting accounts emerged. According to Avik Kleiner, the attorney of Harvey, he denied confessing to the murder of Irene, contradicting the police's assertion that he had admitted to the crime, even though the confession was not recorded. The initial conviction was overturned based on the court's ruling that Harvey should have been reminded of his Miranda rights after requesting to speak to his father during questioning. In 1994, as the case went to a second trial, the focus shifted to the crucial evidence of blood found at the crime scene. The prosecution presented DNA evidence that revealed genetic traits matching both Harvey's blood sample and the stains on a box spring in Irene Schnapp's apartment. The DNA testing, although still in its early stages, indicated that Harvey could not be ruled out as a contributor. To further strengthen their case, prosecution experts utilized dot intensity analysis, a technique that estimated the consistency between the blood characteristics found at the scene and Harvey's DNA. They determined that such a match would occur in only 1 out of every 1,400 African American individuals. However, the defense experts countered, arguing that the ratio could potentially be as low as 1 in 50. This time Harvey was convicted and received the death sentence. However, this verdict was upheld by a divided state Supreme Court in 1997, with some justices expressing differing views. Justice Alan B. Handler, in his dissenting opinion, carefully scrutinized the 64-page analysis of the DNA presented in the case. He voiced his doubts and expressed confidence that at some point in the future, either the state or federal court would likely reverse the decision. In a surprising turn of events, according to an article in the New York Times on May 15, 2005, Kleiner, the attorney of Harvey, pointed a finger of accusation at Peter Stowesser, a former neighbor of Irene. Although Stowesser was once considered a possible suspect by the police, he was subsequently ruled out. Kleiner implicated Stowesser, who is now 61 years old and residing in Hightstown, in both the Irene case and the murder of Donna Machow from East Windsor, who went missing in 1984 and whose body was discovered in 1995. These claims made by Kleiner garnered significant attention, making headlines in the New Jersey section of the Sunday New York Times. He also strongly disputed the accuracy of the blood DNA evidence presented during Harvey's second trial, claiming it to be flawed and contaminated. Additionally, he demanded further DNA testing on other pieces of evidence collected in the case, suggesting that they could have implicated Stowesser instead. Kleiner raised concerns about missing evidence, including the absence of hair from the quilt. He expressed suspicion regarding the classification of the retrieved hair, noting that it was initially labeled as Caucasian and later had the phrase and 1 necroid hair. Kleiner alleged that all the hair evidence, technicians' notes, and microfilm have mysteriously vanished, leading him to believe that the hair evidence never actually existed. Capsack, who continued to serve as a prosecutor in Middle Assault County, expressed unwavering confidence in Harvey's conviction, firmly asserting that Stowesser played no part in the crime. According to Capsack, Stowesser was initially considered as a possible suspect in the case, but he was ultimately eliminated as a prime suspect. The decisive factor was the discovery of a size 6 bloody sneaker print on the victim's pillow, which contradicted Stowesser's size 12 foot. Interestingly, the article failed to mention that Harvey himself wore a size 6 sneaker. However, he clarified that Stowesser's involvement was merely circumstantial and not indicative of his guilt. In April 2007, Judge John F. Malone of the State Superior Court made a decision that dashed Harvey's hopes for a new evidentiary hearing and dismissed his habeas corpus challenge. He overturned Harvey's 1994 conviction, originally a death sentence, due to inadequate legal assistance provided to him during the early 1990s. Despite this development, Harvey, 65 years old, would still serve a 70-year sentence for a separate charge. The death sentence he received in 1994 had been reduced to life in prison without parole when New Jersey abolished capital punishment in 2007. Prior to this abolition, Harvey had spent 20 years on death row, although the state had not carried out an execution since 1963. However, late November 2020, Harvey died in the State Woods State Prison in Bridgeton, which eventually closed all the doors of any further investigation. Peter Stowesser was considered a suspect in the murder of Donna Michaud. The remains of Michaud were found in 1995, approximately a mile away from the location of the Irene crime scene. It was claimed that Michaud and Stowesser were both enrolled in classes at Mercer County College during the fall of 1983. It was pointed out that after Michaud went missing, Stowesser did not attend the spring session classes that he had previously registered for. However, Stowesser maintains that although he attended Mercer County College, he had no knowledge of Michaud or any connection to her. Harvey also was connected to Donna Michaud, as the discovery of Donna's remains was in a wooded area near the farm where Harvey had briefly been employed, which raised suspicion. Adding to the puzzle was the finding of her abandoned car near a sewer plant, conveniently within walking distance of Harvey's residence. These curious circumstances were enough for authorities to focus their attention on Harvey, exploring the possibility of his involvement in the case. Finally, in the last week of April 2023, New Jersey Attorney General Matthew J. Platkin announced that the conclusive identification as the person responsible for the assault and murder of Donna Michaud. The state's Attorney General said, the case was finally cracked when investigators took a fresh look at this decades-old mystery. Colonel Patrick Callahan, superintendent of the New Jersey State Police, said that as 4 decades have passed, the memory of a young life, cruelly taken away, still lingers, haunting the hearts of those who loved her. The predator responsible callously discarded her remains in a shallow grave, leaving them undisturbed for over a decade. However, time cannot extinguish the burning desire for justice. Even though the perpetrator met his fate behind bars, serving time for another heinous crime, and ultimately passing away in 2020, it does not diminish the significance of this long-awaited resolution. We commend the relentless efforts of the Central Regional Cold Case Task Force and the dedicated state police forensic scientist, who hopefully have brought a modicum of solace to the victim's grieving family after all these years. The determination and dedication of law enforcement and forensic experts serve as a reminder that the pursuit of justice knows no time. The case of Brett Ryan. Brett grew up in a prosperous and large Canadian family. His parents, Bill and Susan, had 4 sons. Brett's parents tried to teach him through their own actions. His father held a prestigious job at the Toronto Star daily newspaper and had various hobbies like sports, yoga, and psychology. Likewise, Susan was very hardworking. Their entire household rested on her shoulders. She not only devoted time to her husband and children, but also managed the huge house in Toronto's prestigious area without any help from gardeners or craftsmen. Just like his older brothers, Brett went to university after high school. He always aimed to be better than his siblings, so he advertised painting services in a local newspaper for Toronto residents' houses and fences. Initially, things went well. He made his first earnings and Susan was proud of him, often using him as an example for others. However, making money as a part-time job is one thing. Dropping out of university to spend all your time inhaling paint fumes without proper education is another matter altogether. After some time in university, Brett decided to drop out. For the first couple of years after this decision, Brett still felt confident compared to his older brothers. After a while, when Christopher and Leland graduated and found jobs in their fields, Brett's authority began to wane. Christopher started working for the City of Toronto Transit Commission and Leland became the family artist and designer. Following their studies, they moved out of their parents' home. Brett, to avoid spending part of his earnings on rent, stayed with his father, mother, and younger brother who attended a school for gifted children. With each passing year, Brett grew more desperate due to his mounting debts and his inability to pay them off. He developed depression. By 2007, when Brett was already 26 years old, his debt had ballooned past $60,000. Although Brett was considered an intelligent individual, he did not know how to effectively use his mind. He always put on a cheerful face and helped everyone around him. He was a participant in volunteer initiatives. Consequently, no one could fathom the depth of despair within him. Eventually, a fateful moment arrived when nothing could be done. On October 28, 2007, Brett had no work orders for house painting or any other tasks around the house. Orders were always scarce in the fall, since everyone typically painted their houses in spring or summer. With winter approaching and no prospects for earnings, there was no time to wait. Brett donned all the old clothes he had in his closet, a hat, a long sweater from his older brother, and a scarf knitted by his mother. This particular scarf was comically long. Brett hadn't worn it before, but now found it useful. He wrapped it around his face, leaving only a narrow slit for his eyes, and headed for the bank, located on the outskirts of his neighborhood. Clutching a thick folder, Brett waited for his turn at the bank. When an employee finally summoned him, he approached her and quietly informed her that he had a gun with him. He instructed her to take all the money out of the bank's cash register and give it to him. The girl, shaken with trembling hands, handed him all the cash from the register. Brett then quietly exited the building to avoid drawing the attention of the guards. Once outside, he ran. Upon counting the stolen money, he realized it amounted to just over $1,000. This sum was far from sufficient to clear his debts. He calculated that robbing about 60 banks would be necessary to meet his financial obligations. Despite how improbable that seemed, he saw no alternative. In the initial days following the robbery, Brett was consumed with fear that the police might track him down. To avoid detection, he refrained from going home and informed his mother that he had a job in a neighboring town. Instead, he spent nights in his car, cautiously approaching his house periodically to check if any police cars were hidden nearby. Each visit confirmed silence and no signs of pursuit. This reassured Brett that his plan was working. The success of the first robbery led to more, a second, a third, and a fourth. Each time, Brett took precautions to change his appearance by wearing different clothes, purchased secondhand or even retrieved from trash, and burning them afterward. He also invested in a fake beard from a costume store, since bank employees always mentioned his beard in their testimonies. News outlets in Toronto began covering stories about the bearded robber. But despite this notoriety, he never managed to gain substantial amounts through these crimes, the most being just $3,000 per robbery. Brett hit a snag when police identified his vehicle on surveillance cameras and traced it back to his residence. Lacking solid evidence for an arrest, law enforcement decided simply to monitor him closely. For about 15 days following this new development, Brett refrained from further robberies, even though no more than 3 or 4 days typically passed between crimes before this. His unusual hiatus led some officers to believe they were tailing an innocent person and wasting resources on a dead end. But then fortune turned in favor of law enforcement. Brett left the house, got into a car, and later exited not far from the bank. Wearing a different and unusual outfit, he entered the branch and remained there for some time. Upon leaving, he was immediately apprehended by the police, who announced that the much-discussed bearded robber had finally been caught. Brett had been under investigation for 7 months and was charged with armed robbery. Interestingly, despite having a gun permit, the bearded robber always entered the bank unarmed. He did not even carry a kitchen knife. In total, he faced 19 charges and was subsequently imprisoned. Brett and his family filed multiple appeals, which led to only 8 of the 19 counts being upheld. However, Brett didn't stop there. At the first opportunity to apply for parole, he submitted a petition. In it, he requested consideration of his severe depression, caused by 2 failed relationships and substantial debt. Additionally, he emphasized that he committed these crimes without intending to harm anyone and without carrying any weapons. His remarks were taken into account. However, to secure early release from prison, he had to undergo sessions with a psychologist. These sessions had a positive impact on Brett's behavior and mindset while incarcerated. During this period, he did not communicate with his family but eventually took steps to mend those relationships. The positive changes in Brett were recognized by the commissioners overseeing his case. Consequently, on November 24, 2010, Brett was released from prison. Nonetheless, this hard-won freedom turned out to be more challenging than anticipated. Before becoming known as Brett the Bank Robber, he was simply a painter burdened with personal struggles. Post-incarceration life proved difficult. Few companies were willing to hire an ex-convict with such a tainted background. Even when hired for house painting services, clients would cancel upon recognizing him as the infamous bearded robber. The social repercussions extended to his family as well. Neighbors who once praised Susan's garden began spreading unpleasant rumors about them. The Ryan family decided to sell their house hastily and move to Scarborough, where Susan started cultivating her new garden afresh. Despite these challenges, Brett managed to find employment at a trading company. However, his salary was modest. His parents also assisted financially in helping him rebuild his life and continue his university education. Brett continued to see a psychologist. Each session, the specialist advised him not to sever ties with his family. The psychologist's advice proved effective. However, Brett's financial situation remained precarious. Then, in September 2011, a significant positive event occurred in his life. He met Kristen Baxter. Kristen was an exceptional girl. She owned an apartment with windows that offered a stunning view of the sea, which provided the young couple with a picturesque landscape to enjoy. She was also athletic, maintaining excellent physical condition. Crucially, she was unconcerned about Brett's past. As a couple, they traveled periodically and had even visited Australia. Brett's parents were delighted to observe his relationship with Kristen flourish. They were confident that Kristen would encourage him to advance in life and secure his place in society. Life seemed to improve for Brett until his father passed away. This loss profoundly affected him and triggered a return of depressive symptoms. Consequently, he had to increase his visits to the psychologist and spend time supporting his mother, both emotionally and financially, despite his limited resources. Realizing that their relationship needed to advance beyond casual dating, given their maturity, Brett decided to make a commitment to Kristen. He had saved some money and discussed his intentions with his mother. He expressed his desire to propose to Kristen, the goal being a memorable proposal she couldn't refuse. Understanding her son's intention, Susan provided additional funds for him to purchase an engagement ring. Notably, the couple had previously discussed their future together, and it was clear that Kristen did not require an extravagant gift or similar symbols of commitment. Brett's proposal to Kristen meant the world to her, signaling his serious intentions. Despite this, he decided to go the extra mile and purchased a gold ring adorned with a sizable diamond for his beloved. Naturally, Kristen accepted his proposal. From there, they began planning their wedding. Brett, agreeing with all of Kristen's decisions, nodded in approval. However, the rising costs and financial implications unsettled him. He started worrying about his career prospects and financial stability. Determined to secure a stable job, Brett found an engineering position at a prominent tech company online. He meticulously prepared his resume and applied for the job. To his delight, he was invited for an interview and subsequently received a job offer. Elated by the news, Brett shared it with Kristen and his mother. Eager to make a good impression at his new job, he asked his mother for money to purchase an expensive suit. As always, she didn't refuse him. Yet, just when everything seemed perfect, Brett received a disappointing call from the company. Their security team had uncovered details of his criminal past, leading them to rescind their offer. This news hit Brett hard. It was like a bolt from the blue. His spirits dropped immediately. Frustration set in as he considered the futility of ongoing interviews, each ending in rejection due to his past. Faced with repeated setbacks, Brett decided that rather than continuing with futile efforts and investing time in studies that seemed pointless due to his tarnished record, he would use the funds allocated for university studies on their wedding instead. Brett thus found himself back where he had recently escaped from, but kept certain truths hidden from loved ones, including dropping out of university and being rejected from the engineering role. He maintained appearances by dressing in professional attire each morning before heading to paint houses, changing clothes en route. To further sustain this facade among friends and family, Brett frequently updated his social media profiles with pictures seemingly originating from an office environment or business events, images sourced off the internet, and would even pretend he was resolving urgent work-related matters during family gatherings by faking phone calls regarding work issues. In September 2016, after a 5-year relationship with Kristen, Brett sought to plan a wedding. He demonstrated a remarkable ability to conceal his true situation, successfully creating the illusion of a stable life. Despite being a common painter, he projected an image of success and prosperity. He agreed to rent an expensive restaurant requiring $100 per guest. The entire Ryan family was thrilled seeing Brett's apparent transformation. A prestigious job, a fancy apartment, and an attractive bride. However, the truth of Brett's deceit was far more complex. With the wedding just a month away, Brett needed funds for the event. He repeatedly borrowed money from his mother until she could no longer assist him financially. Desperate, he even demanded that she seek higher-paying employment. Planning his party for August, he invited all his friends and brothers. As the pressure mounted, he confided in his counselor about his deceptions. He had been lying to his family for a year about working as an engineer at a technology company. The psychologist expressed deep disappointment and advised Brett to come clean to his mother. Though reluctant, Brett eventually told his mother the truth. Her devastation was profound. She had spent years boasting about her wonderful son. She insisted that Brett also confess everything to Kristen, or she would do it herself. His brothers were already aware of the lies and supported their mother's stance. Unable to face telling Kristen the truth himself, a shocking task after barely managing to reveal it to his mother, Brett found himself in an untenable position as the wedding approached. He knew that informing Kristen would prevent the ceremony and considered if honesty might have been better. Facing pressure from all sides, Brett still couldn't admit the truth to Kristen and feared his mother might do so before long. Each time Kristen's phone rang, he tensed up until realizing it was not her discovering the secret, but rather another friend discussing wedding plans. Desperate for resolution and unable to handle the mounting stress any longer, he needed a final solution. He was forbidden to use firearms, so the boy decided that the best way to carry out his plan was to use a crossbow. Besides, it's quite a silent murder weapon. One of his late father's hobbies was bow shooting at targets. He taught Brett how to. Yes, Brett was good at target shooting, though it was unlikely his late father thought his son would use that skill in such a manner. Brett bought a crossbow and arrows at a sporting goods store and hid it behind the construction debris lying in Susan's garage. At home, he arranged what he thought was an ingenious alibi invention. He tied a spoon to a fan and set the fan on a timer. When the timer went off, the fan turned on and the spoon moved across the computer keyboard, sending pre-prepared comments to YouTube. From an outsider's perspective, it must have seemed like Brett had spent all day at home watching videos and commenting on them. On the morning of August 25th, Brett dressed in strange clothes that hid his face, left the house through the back door to avoid security cameras, and took a train to his parents' house. His aim was to eliminate anyone who might disrupt his and Kristen's well-being once and for all. Susan was very surprised at her son's unexpected arrival. She had not been feeling well that day, but Brett, despite his mother's condition, began once again to persuade her, and even demand, that she not tell his future wife anything. The mother categorically refused him. Then Brett began to get angry. Susan sensed something wrong seeing her son's mad eyes, and warned him that she had already called Christopher, and he was on his way. Brett went berserk. He ran to the garage to get the crossbow, but found that his anger and adrenaline overflowed him with such force that he couldn't even make a shot. Instead, he bludgeoned his mother with the butt of the gun, and finally ensured she was dead by tightening a rope around her neck. After throwing plastic bags over the body, Brett loaded the crossbow with arrows and hid in the bushes, waiting for his brother to arrive. After a while, Christopher arrived and started calling for their mother or brother, but received no response. Only an arrow shot from behind which pierced his neck, causing him to die within minutes. The next victim was Alexander, their youngest brother. As it turns out, Susan had managed to call him too before everything happened. He was also shot in the neck, but either the arrow did not penetrate deeply or it missed vital arteries. Thus, Alexander did not die immediately, but began to scream and call for help. During this time, Leland was in the house, sleeping in his room on the second floor. He had no idea of the carnage occurring in the garage and garden, much less that his own brother was committing the crime. Leland's sleep was disturbed by a scream. Coming downstairs, he saw Brett trying to strangle Alexander. A fight broke out between Leland and Brett. As soon as Leland gained the upper hand and managed to push Brett aside, he ran to the neighbors and called the police. Brett stayed in the house. He had nowhere to run. He realized this was the moment he had completely ruined his life. With nothing else to do, he took out his phone and wrote Kristen a letter asking her to forgive him. When the police arrived at the crime scene, they saw a bloody Brett sitting next to his equally bloody, but still alive brother Alexander, who would later die in the hospital. Brett himself asked the policeman to handcuff him and take him to the station where he confessed everything. Brett also informed them that his mother's body was hidden under packages in the garage, but it was impossible to help her. At both the police station and later at trial, Brett admitted that he did not intend to kill Susan. His plan was merely to scare her. However, he did plan to kill Christopher and Alexander that day since they were witnesses, and if they hadn't arrived, they would still be alive. Almost 10 years ago, he tried justifying everything with his depressive state, but it did not soften his sentence. Despite acknowledging that Brett confessed everything on his own accord and did not hinder the investigation in any way, the judge sentenced him to 3 life terms, one for each murder with parole eligibility in 2041. As for Leland, he is not speaking to reporters but is known throughout Toronto as the sole survivor of that dreadful incident.